My favorite French author, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, writes, "All of us have had the experience of a sudden joy that came when nothing in the world had forewarned us of its coming. A joy so thrilling that if it was born of misery, we remembered even the misery with tenderness." How will you remember 2020? Full disclosure, this sermon is going to be less about a text and more about testimony. So if you feel it's inappropriate for a minister to detail her personal life in a sermon, turn off this video now. Or if you're more the voyeur type, I'll be spilling the juicy details, so grab yourself some popcorn. Or if you're just desperate to know you're not alone, keep listening. How will you remember 2020? 2020. Okay, how about this? January. We're living at my parents' house in Missouri. That's a story in and of itself. However, I was under contract for a show in Austin, so I flew there, and 2 days after arriving, I got horribly sick with a respiratory virus. I was single parenting in Austin and working 3 jobs and wondering why these doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with me, all the while trying to belt a high F. Awesome. February. Imagine you and your partner run a playwrights retreat in Colorado, but the town where you live and host the retreat is not welcoming. So you move your retreat to another small town in Colorado. That's hard work, relocating, but doable. Except it's a presidential election year, and long story short, only 1 ballot made it to Manuel and me in time. I remember standing in the post office, sobbing as I darkened in the circle by Elizabeth Warren's name, and lamented paying almost $70 mailing applications and ballots back and forth for only one of us to get to vote when it came right down to it. Now, imagine running that same retreat in that brand new town with a pandemic on the horizon. By our final week, the pandemic was sweeping the globe, and I spent the final days terrified of anyone who coughed. 2 days after we left Colorado to return to my parents' house in Missouri, the country went into lockdown. March. I'm the artistic director for a theater in Austin. Yes, theater artists live complicated lives. And when the world stopped, I quickly canceled rehearsals for our spring production, and then I canceled the production. Soon emails began filling my inbox with cancellation from companies who rent our stage. And I knew the arts were in trouble, and my family was in trouble. My husband closed his company in early March, pre-pandemic, and then in late March, all the contracts he'd gained for his next adventure evaporated. Our Airbnb business likewise tanked because of COVID, and in a matter of weeks, we were reliant on 2 small part-time jobs to support our family. My husband's ex-wife sued him because why not? And I was like, has the world gone mad? What is happening? To exacerbate the situation, depression came after me like a lion chasing a gazelle. Nothing like facing a pandemic when you already suffer from a mental health disorder. April. Then our ACA healthcare that we could barely afford refused to pay for any of my medication prescribed from doctors out of state. We had recently relocated to Missouri and I had plenty of refills, but our insurance wouldn't hear of it. Terrified of losing my medication when I was already sick and trying to survive a pandemic, I scrambled to find a new primary care physician during COVID. I paid full price for medicine to buy myself time. Then I moved through 3 different pharmacies because after I did get a new doctor and new prescriptions, my new Missouri insurance refused to pay for my medication anyway. May. Are you exhausted yet? Why don't we just summarize from here on out? I got some weird virus, not corona, which caused spots to cover my body because, 2020. And a few months later, I got it again. Our son-in-law got actual coronavirus, and my husband's aunt died from it. Nevertheless, we were gaslighted by the anti-maskers. My family had purchased a really old house in downtown St. Joseph at the end of 2019. We'd begun restoring it, but when COVID hit, that made it difficult to invite workers into the house, and of course our finances had changed. So we resolved to live with the construction and work on it slowly ourselves. I will let your imagination run wild on that one. Then there was Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and people took to the streets. The world watched in horror as police killed Black people for no reason, and then shot rubber bullets at protesters, including a pregnant woman, causing her to miscarry, and a reporter, causing hospitalization for head trauma, and a young man, causing him to lose his eye. And no one empowered it anything. Then we watched white people show up with AK-47s to protest wearing masks, and again, no one did anything. Then everything caught on fire, literally, like the entire West Coast. We begged my stepdaughter, who lives there, to come stay with us, but she decided she'd rather not be able to breathe because of smoke rather than COVID, and stayed put. We sold our little home in Colorado since the rental market was so unstable, and began the tedious work of driving all our crap in pickup truck after pickup truck across 2 states to bring it to Missouri. That included one trip with a tire blowout in the middle of Kansas in a hailstorm in a cornfield with a toddler. And another trip of packing our pickup truck in 8 inches of snow. Even the birds were laying dead on the ground because it was too early for snow and they hadn't migrated yet. And again, I thought I might join them. Instead, my father figure and friend in Austin died from cancer. And then my dog died on the same day. Then John Lewis died and Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, and it was like we were actually living the movie Infinity War or Endgame. How are we supposed to live without our superheroes? What will life be without Tony Stark and RBG? For my now 100% remote job, I tried to learn video editing and produce an online cabaret to raise money to keep our doors metaphorically open. 2 of my 3 pianists dropped out because they contracted COVID. Hashtag the new normal. Also, hooray, we made it to November. That's this month, right? Remember, I'm writing this sermon early so it can be passed on to the IT gods, who will put it in a video to be released virtually to you on Sunday the 22nd. So who knows what will have happened by then, but here's an overview of the past week. My sister in Kansas City got COVID, and I put her on my prayer list. My other sister in Chicago is due to have a baby any day, but with hospitals in Chicago at 30%, their highest since COVID began, I've put her on my prayer list as well. And then my 97-year-old grandma was exposed to COVID by the independent living staff at her home, and I'm about to have a nervous breakdown because that all went down in the last 12 hours. My God, Anne, what kind of a sermon is this? Can't you talk about Jesus or sing a song or something? Also, count your blessings. So many people have it way worse than you. Things are actually great for you right now. Cool. I'm gaslighting myself now. Okay, hold up. Let's go back. Let's pull a Hamilton wedding moment and rewind. Except I feel like I started with Angelica's I will never be satisfied. And now it's time to hear the story again, this time from Eliza's point of view. Or maybe it's more like the movie Clue, with its 3 alternate endings. A sign flares up. That's how it could have happened, but how about this? How will you remember 2020? January. It turns out I'm a superhero mom. I was a single parent for several weeks in Austin where I worked 3 jobs, took care of my toddler, all while sick as a dog. Plus, did you know I can still belt a high F after a C-section? Work! I'm so grateful. I still have my health and work, and my sweet little child is so flexible and he loves our crazy artist life. My husband and I saw the power of our playwrights retreat that we created and expanded, and we sent it to another town in Colorado with plans to add additional programming in Missouri. National Winter Playwrights Retreat indeed was moving across the nation. Granted, COVID did hit pause on the Missouri expansion, but we're so grateful for all the connections we've made and the possibilities post-pandemic. It gives me hope for what we can accomplish on the other side of this. My husband lost his contracts because of COVID, but was able to get unemployment and stimulus money. I feel really grateful because some of our veteran and unhoused neighbors never received their checks, or they aren't in the system, so to speak, and they didn't get the government stimulus money. So this has been eye-opening for us, a reminder to return to gratitude, and also to strategize about how to help the poorest of the poor get the assistance they are due during this terrible time. Speaking of screwed up systems, we watched the agonizing 9-minute death of George Floyd in broad daylight under the knee of a policeman, and we knew it was over. As a nation, we rose up, sick of the blatant and systematic discrimination against all people of color, but especially Black people who have been fighting for the right to be seen as human since white people packaged them up on a boat bound for the Americas. It was a freaking pandemic and people would not rest. We peacefully stood up, demanding the attention of the media, the government, the world. We demanded that white people start the hard work of examining our privilege, that our communities reimagine funding for police to ensure safer communities served by experts and prevent overworked and undereducated emergency responders. And we demanded that the government examine economic justice and reparations. For as terrifying as it was, or is, it was thrilling to watch a movement unfold. Yes, we lost John Lewis and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but I'm getting a new niece who I know will be amazing. She'll be a light in this world. And look at the thousands of millions of people rising up in the absence of these great leaders. Voting percentages are looking to be their highest in 120 years, with 80% of eligible voters voting in Minnesota. Look at the children leading us forward. You've probably heard of Greta Thunberg, the Swedish climate activist, but there's also Jamie Margolin from Seattle and Minnesota's Isra Hirsi. For LGBT rights, there's 12-year-old Desmond is Amazing, an activist and teen drag queen. And the children rose up for Black Lives Matter too, including 15-year-old Z Thomas in Nashville, who organized a 10,000-person protest where people spoke standing on water coolers. And 8-year-old Nolan Davis, who made national news for organizing and speaking at a protest in Kirkwood, Missouri. Are you melting from how adorable and inspirational these kids are? They bring new meaning to 1 Timothy 4:12. Don't let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set an example for the believers. Happiness. It is useless to seek it elsewhere than in the warmth of human relations, continues Antoine de Saint-Exupéry from the quote I shared earlier about misery and joy. Only a comrade can grasp us by the hand and haul us free. Yes, my family had to sell our little home in Colorado. Yes, we had to move across the country in a pandemic. Yes, my industry was labeled inessential. Yes, my husband shifted careers right before a pandemic destroyed the economy. Yes, we had to figure out how to safely go to the doctor and shop for groceries and afford healthcare and learn video editing so we could try to survive the pandemic. Yes, someone stole my Biden-Harris sign and my hate has no home here sign. But like my therapist told me, they carried that positive energy away with them into their own space. That gave me a good laugh picturing my signs smushed in someone's trunk or trash can, radiating good energy despite their unfortunate procurement process. The disciples can complain about Mary wasting money on perfume all they want, but she's the one Jesus praised. When Jesus spoke of death, Mary is the one who chose to respond with gratitude instead of fear, or perhaps in spite of fear. How will you respond to the story of 2020? People of Jewish and Christian faith come from a long tradition of telling stories and retelling stories. This is natural for a religion that started off as an oral tradition, but it has continued to be a part of both faiths' practices. For example, at Passover every year, Jews eat bitter herbs to remind them of the bitterness of slavery in Egypt. Christians deprive themselves during Lent to remind themselves of the sacrifice Christ made, submitting to corporate punishment. We tell hard stories, including the Garden of Gethsemane and Lazarus dying and the bleeding woman who touched Jesus. And we tell them gratefully because they have informed who we are today. We pour the perfume in gratefulness. We bend over and wet our hair, the smell overwhelming us, and we wipe the caked mud from God's feet. What an image. Don't get me wrong. I am very afraid. You heard version 1 of my story from this year. I am dehydrated from 8 months of crying. But I am grateful too. I am grateful because I can list the people who have grasped me by the hand to haul me free. And I am grateful because both versions of the story I told are true. They live in paradox and they live in my body. And some days one story gets told and some days it's the other. And that's fine and normal and even healthy. I am grateful because I don't have to ignore the bad things in life or pretend like evil doesn't exist or paint my existence with only happy stories in order to find joy. I come from a faith tradition that includes slavery, wilderness, prostitution, exodus, political unrest, familial discord, religious hypocrisy, public execution, and yes, resurrection. I'm grateful because I can sit with the uncomfortable, scream at the unethical, and cry at the unbelievable, and still be a person of faith and joy. I can be a person who remembers the misery with tenderness. I've been reading Learning to Walk in the Dark by one of my favorite preachers, Barbara Brown Taylor. In it, she shares the following realization. Jesus was born in a cave and rose from the dead in a cave. As many years as I have been listening to Easter sermons, I have never heard anyone talk about that part. Resurrection is always announced with Easter lilies, the sound of trumpets, bright, streaming light. But it did not happen that way. If it happened in a cave, it happened in complete silence, in absolute darkness, with the smell of damp stone and dug earth in the air. New life starts in the dark. Whether it is a seed in the ground, a baby in the womb, or Jesus in the tomb, it starts in the dark. So, if you feel like you're stuck in a dark, damp cave this Thanksgiving, or if you're hugging your isolated family full of joy, either way, you're in good company. Both are normal experiences right now, and both stories are rooted in a diverse but very real faith tradition. To 2020, whose experiences included Australia catching on fire, impeaching the president with no recourse, a pandemic, an economic recession, murder hornets, and so much more. We are over you. But we will also cling to the moments of joy, so thrilling that even if they were born of misery, we remember the misery with tenderness. Amen and amen.